I am so thankful to know our great King. Aren't you? We serve a great King, and we get to preach and hear about a great Christ. One of the books I have about preaching, the man says there are no great preachers, only a great Christ. And it is our privilege to preach Him. And it is a privilege to preach His name, our eternal King. I'm so thankful for the opportunity to open the Bible and look at Christ's life with you and behold our King together. Well, I am in the midst of regional basketball. I'm character coaching. I'm not coaching basketball. I love basketball, but I'm not coaching it, although they might say otherwise, hearing me from the sideline, especially when it comes to getting a rebound. I mean, box out. It's not what it used to be, Brother Grant. It's not what it used to be. You got to box out. Anyways, we're in the midst of regional basketball. The Northgate Vikings with the varsity basketball team, and regional play is pretty intense because you're playing to earn your spot and earn a good position when you go to the playoffs. When other teams, you're competing for the regional championship, and region play especially. What you start, as you see the intensity go up, you start to see teams, especially when they're on defense, begin to apply a full court press. Now, if I say full court press, who knows what I'm kind of talking about, kind of get a gauge. Full court press. So in basketball, it's very simple. They're not trying to get their 25 cents back like on the football field, right? Get the quarterback. Okay, anyways, in basketball, you have the team on offense, and their goal is to get down to this end of the court and score in that basket. And the team that's defending wants to stop them, and vice versa. So when this team has the ball, they want to come this way, and they want to score in that basket, and this team has to stop them. It's all about getting that leather in through that basket, all right? Now, when a team applies a full court press, the team that's on offense, they're trying to come this way. And the team on defense, they're bringing all their defenders, or nearly all. They have defenders all the way across the court. There's 5-on-5. And so they bring guys up here, and they want to get them in the backcourt. They want to try to steal the ball, be close to their basket, and they're applying pressure. And they'll do something called a trap, where two of them will come against one guy, and they'll try to get him, and they get their hands all in his face. And oftentimes what that does is it'll force a turnover. Not an apple turnover. Some of the offenders, the offensive player gives up the ball. He cracked under pressure. He couldn't take the pressure. Often with a team, you find out what they are made of during regional play. You find out what kind of team, what their skill is when they are under pressure. How do they handle pressure? How do you handle pressure? The olive press, Gethsemane. I want you to picture in your mind. There's on the back of your bulletin. There's a reference to a link on YouTube called "Jesus the Pressed Olive," and it will give you video of an olive press in Israel. I'm a visual guy. And maybe you like some visuals as well, and get a picture, an idea of what these olive presses would be like. Remember, they went into the Mount of Olives, and where you have olives, you have olive trees. Where you have olive trees, you have olive orchards. Where you have olive orchards, you have olive presses. Where what they would do, it was kind of a two-step process. If you watch the video, they have this almost like this big old thing here with a millstone. You know what a millstone is? Big, round, concrete-looking wheel, and has a hole in it that some kind of a wooden shaft would go through that hole, and then on each end of that wooden shaft would be attached a rope so they could attach it to a donkey. And so the olive press worker would be making the donkey walk around that press so that by the strength of the mule, that millstone is turning, and what do you think it's doing to the olives? It's crushing them. And really, frankly, when I saw that, I thought, well, that's the press. Here comes the oil. But I'm looking at the video, and it's just mashing them. Like mashed potatoes. But I'm not having mashed olives. All right? Okay. Now, this is like an olive mash. So it mashes them. So he takes it out, and he fills it in a basket, and he brings the basket. And over here, I don't know how it's set up, but there's this massive log Now, if you know anything about, we have a tree that dropped down out here over December, and I'm not going out in the morning, giving it some bench press, okay? That tree is massive and it's heavy, and this is a massive log that they have designed and set up so that it stretches out across, and they take these baskets and they'll stack them up underneath that tree, and then they have it set up so that when they want to press it, I don't know how they do it, but it allows the weight to then start to apply pressure onto these baskets full of olive mash. And as it does that, what do you think comes out of the mash? Oil. And it runs down this groove or this duct that they have made into some sort of a bowl. And Israel, and maybe still to this day they do this, but back in Bible times especially, they used olive oil, primarily for lighting lamps. Lighting lamps. In fact, in the tabernacle, God commanded them, if I remember correctly, somewhere in Leviticus, about using pressed olive oil for lamps. And so I want to think about your life for a second, because you did not come here for me to talk about the world of the Bible and never get to the world of your Monday morning. Okay? And some of you are experiencing an incredible amount of pressure. You feel like a mashed olive. You feel like a pressed olive. And I don't know what it is in your life. Perhaps it's an issue in your marriage, or an issue in your home, or an issue in your workplace, or perhaps it's the state of affairs in America. And there is an immense amount of pressure and burden in your life. In fact, perhaps you feel depressed. I've talked to someone recently who's been depressed most of his life. Depression is a growing problem in our country. And frankly, when I've told this friend of mine, I was telling him about what we're looking at today, and he's like, man, they struggled with depression back then? They did. And in fact, we're going to get there, but some of the words describing the sorrow of Jesus in this text are some of the strongest Greek words in the New Testament that deal with depression. And that's what Jesus experienced. And so I'm just asking you, what is pressing you right now? But even more so, as your life is mashed, as your life is pressed, what is coming out of you? And what is this pressure revealing about you and who you are? So Jesus, if you look at the text in Matthew chapter 26, of course, this is his hour. This is the dark hour of his life. This is a very difficult time for him, and by extension, it's a very difficult time for his disciples, and he was concerned with them and how they would handle this difficult time. And as Jesus always was, he was just honest with them about what was going to happen. In fact, we saw in verse 31 that Jesus told them, all of you are going to be offended because of me this night. That word offended has the idea, it kind of picture those defenders, the 2-on-1 coming in to trap the guy. It kind of pictures someone who's trapped, who's stuck, or someone who gets tripped up, or someone who hears a temptation and they get caught in a snare. And this situation that Jesus was about to be in, and because they followed Jesus, they were about to be in, this situation Jesus knew would offend them. So much so that they would leave him. And even said in verse 31, he referenced the Old Testament scriptures. See, Jesus, he though he was the Son of God, he depended upon the written word of God. He referenced the prophet Zechariah that said, God said through the prophet, smite the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. And Jesus anticipated that he had been telling them that he would be betrayed, he'd be handed over into the hands of sinners, and he would be mistreated by these men, and he would be then handed over to the Romans, and he'd be mocked, and he'd be scourged, and he would be crucified. And he told them that would happen. And so now he's saying this night, when all this starts to take place, he's been telling them it's coming. When this starts to take place, all of you are going to scatter because they're going to smite the shepherd. And all of you like sheep are going to scatter from me. Now you picture a shepherd over here on a hillside with the sheep. And without the shepherd, the sheep they're sheep. Sheep is dumb. I almost mooed like a cow because I'm like a sheep and I'm dumb, okay? Meh, right? Sheep is dumb. Without the shepherd, they're lost. Without their shepherd, they're vulnerable. Without the shepherd, they're exposed. And if a wolf comes along and attacks the shepherd and kills them, the sheep are fair game for everybody. If a robber comes along and beats the shepherd nearly to an inch of his life, the sheep are going to scatter everywhere. And Jesus is saying, tonight I'm going to be taken. And I'm going to be betrayed. I'm going to suffer all these things. I will be crucified. And you're going to scatter. You think you're strong, but you're weak without me. You're weak without me. Well, before I get there, when Jesus told them about their impending failure, he was clear to say in verse 32, did you see that? He said, but after I am risen again, because now think about this. Every time in Matthew up to this point, he told them he'd be betrayed, he would be handed over to sinners, and he would be unjustly handled, he would suffer, he would die. He always said, I will rise again. But they never paid attention to that. And even here, they didn't pay attention to that fact. But here Jesus says, hey, you're going to fail, but your failure isn't going to be final. Not because of you, but because of me. I'm going to rise again, and I'm going to go before you into Galilee, even gives them the place. And we'll see in Matthew 28, that's exactly where they find him after he rose again. And that's going to be a good one. But we got to go through Gethsemane first. And so he tells them, you're going to scatter tonight. And Peter said, verse 33, now, Jesus, you might be right about James and John and all these other guys. I'm Peter. You named me Peter. I got a name from you. I'm strong. I'm probably your best disciple. I'm pretty committed to you. Though everybody would be offended by you, he said, and then he didn't just say, I'm not going to be offended. He's like, I will never be offended. There is not a situation I would face, Jesus, that I will walk away from you. He's pretty confident in himself, isn't he? You ever that confident in yourself? And that's how Peter felt. But Jesus told him, hey, verily I say to you, I'm telling you the truth, that this night, before the rooster crows in the morning. Now, the rooster was crowing pretty early this morning. I would know. That thing is loud. He says, before the rooster crows, this night, you're going to deny me 3 times. Peter's full of himself. Though everybody else offended, I will never be offended. And Jesus said, I'm going to tell you the truth, Peter. This very night, you think you're not going to be offended by me, but before that rooster goes cock-a-doodle-doo, you're going to have denied that you even know me 3 times. 3 times. Well, at that, Peter said, no. Though I would die with you. I'm willing to die with you. You're saying you're going to die. I'd be willing to go and die with you, but I will never deny you. I mean, he's arguing with Jesus. In fact, verse 35 says all the disciples said that. So then you find Jesus coming with them into Gethsemane. So I want you to picture this garden, because we talk about the Garden of Gethsemane, and he comes to Gethsemane and he tells his disciples to sit here while I go and pray over there. And so verse 37, he gets Peter and he gets James and John. They are the sons of Zebedee. And he starts to head this way. And did you notice what it says at the end of verse 37? It says he began to be sorrowful and very heavy. Very weighed down. Picture the log, the press. Feel how that feels. The hardest thing you've ever endured, perhaps are enduring. The pressure of that and the weight of that. And that's how Jesus was beginning to feel. And he goes in verse 38, he tells Peter, James, and John, because he's brought them further into the garden, and he tells them, my soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. I am so burdened, I am so sad, I am so depressed, I could die. That came out of the lips of the Son of God. He was so depressed that he could die. And so he had a simple request to them, didn't he? He said, tarry here, stay right here, and watch with me. What does that mean? He wanted them to stay awake. a military watch. Through the night, you're staying awake and you're on guard, and so that something bad doesn't happen. And he's in the darkest hour of his life as a man, and he asks his 3 closest disciples, who they think they're pretty committed to Jesus, don't they? Peter's convinced he will never walk away from Jesus. He will never deny Jesus. And so here you go. Here's your opportunity to prove how committed you are, to prove how strong a Christian you are, to prove how faithful a disciple you are. In Jesus' darkest hour, and Jesus gives him the opportunity, he says, why don't you stay with here and stay up with me? And he's sorrowful and he's heavy. Would you help me bear this burden? In verse 39, he went a little further. And the scriptures say he fell on his face. The weight of what was on his life and coming in his life was so heavy, it's almost like you feel like the weight of it as he's walking drives him to fall to the ground. In agony and sorrow and in prayer, and he prays to his Father. He says, oh, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. He mentioned this cup, so what's the idea there? I have somewhat of a cup. I try to get something that might help us take us back in time. Cups in that time, especially when used in this language, were very symbolic. So you see in the Old Testament, if the wrath of God toward a nation was filling up a cup, meaning that their behavior was getting so bad that the cup of God's wrath was filling up, and it's about to overflow, so that his wrath would be poured out on them. But here in this case, Jesus, the cup that was in front of him, that he was going to have to drink, that he was going to have to experience, was to experience the wrath of God in our place. The cup of suffering. The cup of being betrayed by a close friend. The cup of being abandoned by his disciples. The cup of being mocked and ridiculed by the Jews and being handed over to the Romans and having them basically strip him naked and rip out his beard and drive a crown of thorns in his hands and lash him with whips. This terrible physical cup of suffering that he was about to drink. And as a man, he was so sorrowful that he said, if it's possible, let this cup pass. He asked his Father in his sorrow, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. But then what did he say? Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. He was willing, if it was his Father's will, he was willing to drink this cup. And so he went back to his disciples, you see, in verse 40. And guess where he finds them? This is the guy who moments ago said, everybody else will abandon you, but I never will. I would die with you, Jesus, but I would never deny you. And Jesus says, would you stay here and watch? I'm very sad. And he goes and he prays and he comes back, and Peter's sacked out. Who thinks Peter overestimated his commitment to Jesus? Just a little bit. And Jesus asked him, he's like, what? Could you not watch with 1 hour? Could you not stay awake for 1 hour? And he instructed him then in verse 42 to watch and pray. Or I think it's verse 41. Yeah, verse 41, to watch and pray. Just stay awake and pray. You need to pray. Why? That you enter not in temptation. Remember, Jesus, he's got to go through this. He's got to experience this. The press is on Jesus, but the press is equally on his disciples. And they're about to experience their Messiah being ripped from their lives and being ripped from their hearts. And they're about to experience this. And he knows this. He tried to tell them up front. And now here they are in the dark hour. And they are asleep. He knows what's about to happen. He knows who's about to come. And all that they're about to experience. And he knows it's going to be very tempting for them to leave out on him. And so he says, you need to stay awake and pray. Because your spirit, did you see what it said in verse 41? Your spirit is willing. It's not that the disciples weren't willing to be committed to Jesus. It wasn't that they didn't have this desire to stay true to him, because they had it. And it's not that that was a bad thing, but the problem was that Jesus knew back then, and he knew right now, their flesh was weak. Is your flesh weak? I sure have a weak flesh. On my best days, my spirit's willing. Man, my flesh is still weak. And it's the same for you. And so Jesus then left them there, it says in verse 43, or in verse 44, and he went away again the second time. And again, picture the cup, and he's on his face praying, "Oh, my Father." And he's basically saying, if the only way this cup's going to pass is for me to drink it, thy will be done. If the only option, this cup's at my place at the table, this cup of suffering and dying for these men, and dying for the sinners who are about to take me, if the only way to deal with this cup of suffering that you have set at my place is for me to drink it, thy will be done. And he submitted. And he came back to his disciples again in verse 43, and guess what? How he found them again. Again. And why were they asleep? Their eyes were heavy. Isn't that an interesting comment? Well, duh, you fall asleep when your eyes start to get heavy. But don't miss the contrast here. Here is Jesus' soul. Here is Jesus' heart. Here is Jesus pouring out all that he is before his Father. His very soul is very heavy, heavier than any man or woman has ever experienced. Truthfully. What he was about to experience, the sorrow and the heaviness was heavier than anything. And here he is, he's staying awake and he's praying. But here they are, they're asleep. Because their eyes were getting a little heavy. These people who were convinced that they were strong and able to do what they needed to do, they were weak. And their eyes were heavy. And so, verse 44, he left them and he went away again the third time and he prayed the same words. So he came back, and in verse 45, it's like he more or less just comforted them and allowed them to get their rest. He says, sleep on now, take your rest, just get what rest you need. And he again told them, behold, the hour is at hand. The Son of Man is going to be betrayed in the hands of sinners. It's not that he didn't recognize their weakness. In fact, he was willing to let them get some rest. And can you imagine that if they had just stayed awake, he would have let them get some rest when he was done coming back? But the point is, he knew they were weak. And he knew they wouldn't stay awake. And he knew they wouldn't pray. Because his assessment of them, what he knew about them was honest. And it was right here. But their assessment of themselves was up here. And they needed to go through the experience of being pressed to find out they didn't have a handle on this thing like they thought they did. The point guard who's on offense, and he thinks he's a good ball handler until the press comes on him and two guys are trapping him and they steal it away. He was all cocky. He's like, I'll never lose the ball. I'll never lose the ball, but then it's 2-on-1 and he can't handle it. Oh, turnover. And you and I in our lives, how we often we can get so confident as Peter did, that I will never fail Jesus. I would never walk away from Jesus. I would never get bitter. I would never accuse God. I would never question God. I would never. And yet when the press is on, our assessment of ourself that was way up here, Jesus walks us through the trial and we begin to realize that we were somewhere down here. And so Jesus lets them sleep. And then it's almost like, these verses are interesting because in verse 46, it's like, verse 45, he says, sleep on, take your rest. But then verse 46, rise, let us be going. And now think about this. Matthew wrote down these words. Likely, he wasn't there with Peter, James, and John. He probably wrote these things down based on what Peter, James, and John told him, right? That makes sense. And so if you can imagine the experience of the disciples from their memory, their recollection was, you ever have recollection like you're dozing in and out and then someone comes, talks to you in the middle of the night and then they leave. Next morning you're like, what was that about? We have that with children all the time, Well, it'll be like 10 o'clock the next morning. Wait a minute, did one of the kids come in last night? Okay, and so you picture the disciples, they're heavy with sleep and they're in and out of consciousness, and it's almost like at one point they hear Jesus, hey, go ahead and get some sleep because the one who's going to betray me, the hour of betrayal's right here. And then the next thing they know, Jesus is saying, hey, wake up, it's time to go. You see that? Rise, let us be going. And it's interesting because he said, rise, let us be going. Behold, he is at hand that does betray me. Now notice something. Jesus was about to go meet this headlong. He wasn't about to go run from this. He wasn't about to just flake out on the will of God. No, he had already submitted to drink every last drop of the cup that his Father had for him. And he says, rise, it's time to go, because the one that betrays me is at hand. And as soon as he says it, verse 47, here's Judas, the traitor. And with him, he has a great crowd. And they've got swords, and they have clubs, and they have spears, and they have torches and lanterns. This great mob of men. It's the middle of the night. And here they come to take hold of Jesus. And take Jesus to the chief priests and the elders of the people. And they're coming, and Judas had told them, hey, let me give you a sign so you know which one to take. Whoever I give a kiss. And that was just the way they would greet each other in that time, close friends. I don't know if it was the one on each cheek thing. Some cultures, they would kiss on the lips. Well, whatever they did, Judas told them, whoever I kiss, that's the one you need to take. And notice what he said. He said, hold him fast. Hold him fast. As if Jesus was going to fight his way out of this. As if Jesus was going to struggle and fight. As if Jesus had not submitted to drink the will of his Father. And drink out of the cup. And so here comes Judas, and here comes the crowd. And immediately, forthwith, Judas comes right up to Jesus. And he said, hail, Master. I mean, the heaviness of this moment. The agony Jesus is dealing with. The plot behind the scenes. The darkness of the hour, and Judas is coming up. Hail is just a friendly greeting. Hello, Master. And he kissed him like, long time no see. And Jesus said, I almost pictured Judas coming and giving him this kiss on the cheek or however. And I almost pictured Jesus grabbing a hold of him, embracing him. Maybe kissing him back. And saying to him, friend, holding him right here. The man who has just handed him over to his enemies. And he calls this man his friend. And asks him, why are you here? Wherefore art thou come? It was obvious why he was there. Jesus knew it. Judas knew it. But Jesus wanted Judas to think about it. Why are you here? Why did you come? And immediately, as soon as that happened, before Judas could give an answer, this mob, they came and they took Jesus and they arrested him. Well, here they are, and they're binding him up to take him off to the chief priests and the elders. And one of them that was with Jesus, and we know from parallel accounts, so don't make fun of my sword, one of my kids took the handle off. But that's a good illustration of how flimsy our efforts in such situations are. Because one of them, namely Peter, he took his sword and he's hacking away. He's hacking away. He just failed Jesus. Okay, let's back up with Peter. I will never run away from you. Though I would die with you, I will not deny you. Hey, stay awake for me. No problem, Jesus. He gets arrested. And now Peter's like, I have to do something. He rips out his sword. And I don't think that Peter was this expert. He was a fisherman. It's not like he was like giving the guy a warning shot. Psst, ear, next time it'll be something else. I don't think that was the case. I think he was going for his head. He's swinging for his head. And I picture this servant moving like this. And whoop, off comes the ear and it's fallen to the ground. And other accounts tell us that Jesus healed the man. But this account, all it highlights is the fact that one of Jesus' disciples, in this act of rashness, the best we can do is to start trying to hack and fight our way. When the truth was, Peter couldn't fight his way out of a paper bag. And you know what Jesus said to him? You saw it in what'd you see? In verse 52, he said, put your sword away. He says, the people that take up the sword, they're going to die by the sword. Now, we could try to explain all that and talk about all different things, but really the point is this. Jesus did not come to fight like that. Jesus did not come to take up a sword and fight these people. What did he come to pick up? A cup. He did not come to fight off his enemies and fight off the will of his Father and fight these men off. And he did not tell his disciples to do this. In fact, he told them early on, after he told them, I'm going to be crucified. And Peter said, no, that'll never happen to you. You know what he said? He rebuked Peter and he said, if you want to be my disciple, unless you're willing to take up your cross and follow me, unless you're willing to die, you're not worthy to be my disciple. The only way you can be disciples is if you're willing to drink the same cup I'm willing to drink. And Jesus told him, put up your sword. And then he asked him that question. Don't you think, Peter, that right now, if I wanted to, I could ask my Father for over 12 legions of angels and he would give them to me right now? You imagine over 80,000 angels? Let me just remind you of something. You remember Hezekiah the king? Back in the Old Testament, you can read about it in Isaiah, you can read about it in the books of the Kings and the Chronicles, how Hezekiah was a king and the city of Jerusalem was surrounded by this massive army, if I have my facts straight, and Sennacherib was the emperor over Assyria with the invading army, and there were over 100,000 people, maybe 185,000 people, and in one night, one angel killed them all. And Jesus could have had on demand over 80,000. And what's Peter got? This. And he's lopping off ears. What was Jesus' point? I didn't come to do that. Because if I asked my Father for those 80,000 angels to come and set me free, you know what wouldn't happen? I wouldn't drink the cup. And I wouldn't fulfill the scriptures. And I wouldn't do what my Father has said I as a Messiah will do so that sinners can be forgiven of their sin and they can have eternal life in my kingdom. If I approached this, Peter, your way and picked up a sword and picked up the sword, everybody on planet Earth would be destroyed. But I am doing this my Father's way, and I am going to drink every last cup that He has chosen me to drink so man can be forgiven and have life. And it's so interesting because he turns from Peter and he turns to these men to get them to think. He says, what is this? You coming out to me like I'm a thief? I was with you every day. I was teaching in the temple and you never came and laid hands on me. Listen, if this is just, why didn't you take a hold of me in the temple? If you are right in doing this, why didn't you arrest me through the normal legal means? Why are you here in the middle of the night like you're after some conspiracy theorist, after some thief, after some criminal, after some robber? You know why you're here? Because God has planned, He foreordained before the foundation of the world that He would hand me over to sinners so I would die and the scriptures would be fulfilled. And even you in your wickedness and in your evil, the plan of God is being fulfilled so that you can have forgiveness. Now I want us to think here. Okay, and you have on the back of your bulletin, if you wanted, I have a few notes for you. Because there is a difference between what is pressed out of us and what was pressed out of Jesus. What is pressed out of us? Number one, and you can write this down. When we are feeling pressure in life, whether it's because I'm a human being or whether it's because of whatever I'm experiencing because of Jesus. Because I'm talking to mostly Christians this morning. And a lot of times, the things we deal with in our life, the pressure that comes on us in our life is because we follow Jesus. And so what does the press out of us? Well, the first thing I saw is that it presses denial out of us. Because Jesus knows you better than you know yourself. And He knows how you are going to respond to every difficulty of life you face, and He will tell you so. Sometimes He will tell you directly from the Scriptures. Other times He'll have a brother or sister in Christ shoot straight with you. Other times you're going to hear it from the pulpit. Other times you're listening to a song on the radio and you break down and weep because the song hits you right in the heart and tells it to you right like it is, and God's talking to you. And yet, you know what we typically do? We deny it. Oh, I would never. It's not that bad. I'm a better Christian than that. I'm a better Christian than them. I would never respond to this difficult circumstance like they would. And we deny our own spiritual weakness. And we deny our own spiritual apathy. And we deny our own spiritual hurt. It's denial. It's denial. The second thing you see is weakness. Because the truth is, as disciples, the only way through the great difficulties of life is to stay watchful, keep our eyes on Jesus, and to pray. Jesus, in his hour of darkness, he depended on his Father in prayer. And do we, as human beings, who we are not the Son of the living God, we are humans, do we think we're going to do better than that? Than to get alone in our prayer closet and seek God and pour out our lives? But what the press presses out of us often is weakness. That we're struggling and we're willing to respond to things God's way. We're willing to submit to Jesus, but the reality is our flesh is weak. And we're just tired. And we struggle. And what comes natural to us is to respond to things any old way we want, to find comfort in earthly things like a good night's sleep. When Jesus might want you to spend some time in the middle of the night talking to him about what you're going through. It presses out of you your weakness. And it presses out of you your rashness. Because truth is, when Jesus is honest with you, and then you start denying it, but then there's evidence of your weakness, well, then you got to prove how strong you are. So you do this, and you start hacking away at your circumstances and your difficulties. Maybe that's how you feel this election season. Maybe you feel very weak when it comes to what's going on in America, and you feel like we're about to walk through an hour of trial, and you have decided disciples aren't supposed to suffer, even though Jesus said they will. And you have pulled out a sword, and you are hacking away. Or whether it's in your relationship with your spouse, and the pressure is on. And Jesus is being honest with you that it's not as much their fault as it is yours. And you need to deal with yourself. And yet you are denying that, and you're proving how weak you are, and then you're ready for a fight. And Jesus says, put your sword up. Put it away. And ultimately, what the press presses out of us is flight. It's easier to run from our problems than to deal with them. It's easier to give up on a marriage than to seek God's will for it. It's easier to give up on a relationship, to quit a job when it's hard, to want to leave America when days are dark. It's easier to run. And listen, we see this in the lives of people who they're under pressure and they've experienced difficulty and they've experienced heartache. But when they're dealing with this pressure and the distress and the depression in human terms, and they're denying what Jesus says about them, and they're demonstrating how weak they are, and they're getting rash and swinging around, what often results and is the case is exactly what happened to the disciples in the end of verse 56, how all the disciples, they forsook him and fled. They ran. Jesus knew exactly what they were going to do. And Jesus knows that at your best as a human under pressure, you may very well just totally give up on Jesus. He didn't do anything for me. Well, he tried to tell you what was going to happen. And he tried to help you realize what you were actually made of. So that's what the press presses out of us. What did the press out of Jesus? Did it press out of Jesus denial? No, it pressed out of him the truth. The truth. He told his disciples the truth about what they would do. He came to his Father and he told him the truth. I don't want to drink this cup. He told him the truth. He came to the disciples again. He was continually discipling them, telling them the truth. You're weak. Peter's swinging his sword. He's like, what are you doing? And he told him the truth. And here he is. These guys are coming who hate him and hate his guts and want him dead. And he's telling them the truth. The scriptures must be fulfilled. When the pressure was on with Jesus, out came the truth. Because he is the truth. He can't help but speak the truth. It was truth. But you know what the press also pressed at him? Did you see him lying on his face? Did you see him weighed down? Other texts of Scripture would say great sweat drops of blood came out of him. He was so distressed and discouraged that his sweat was mixed with blood. That is a physical condition that can actually happen to a human being when they're under great distress. And it happened to Jesus. The Son of God was greatly depressed. And isn't it comforting that God sent his Son, and he ensured he was born of a woman, born of a virgin, so that you and I could know that he knows what our pain feels like? That when he was under pressure, he knows, hey, we have pressures over here. But it's not like he never experienced pressures. It's not like he never drank out of a cup of suffering. It's not like he never tasted death, because he knows exactly what that feels like. He knows it pressed sorrow out of him. And then, you know what it pressed out of him? It pressed his submission. Because even in his sorrow as the Son of God, he did not try to fight his way out of this. He did not call on those 80,000 plus angels to set him free. He could have called 10,000 angels, but he didn't. He died alone for you and me. And he submitted to the will of his Father. If you want me to drink out of this cup, I will drink it. And he submitted to what God wanted him to do. And really, ultimately, that revealed the last thing, his love. Because from the very beginning of this story to the end, you only tell the truth. Jesus only tells the truth to disciples who he knows are going to fail him, because he loves them. Jesus only wants you to know the truth about yourself and how weak you really are, because he loves you. And he knows what you will do if you don't deal with that. He loved them. Think about the traitor, Judas. Here comes Judas, a man he had poured his life into for the past 3 years, acting like everything's cool in the hour of Jesus' darkness, kissing him and betrayal on the cheek, and he grabs hold of him and calls him friend. And even his enemies, who worked into the plan of Satan to kill him, out of love, he tells them this is what God has planned in the Word of God. It pressed out of him love. Now here's what we need to realize. Because you might look at this and, well, this is what the press presses out of us, and this is what the press pressed out of Jesus, and you know what? I'll just pull myself up by my bootstraps and be more like Jesus. This is not a Jesus is your example, you can do better sermon. Because the reality is, apart from the Son of God and without Jesus, every single time, you and I as human beings are right here. The Gospels in the Bible and the Scriptures as a whole, this is not a book to tell us, you're lousy, but you can do better. Come on, let's do better. No, the Gospels reveal to us, you're a sinner, and you're weak, and you need a Savior who can save you from your sin and death. This isn't about you saying, I'll just do better next time, and when the pressure's on, I'll just get stronger, and I'll do more spiritual push-ups, and I'll read my Bible more, and the next time I'll get it. No, this isn't about that at all. This is about the fact that Jesus, and only Jesus, when the pressure was on his life, and the weight of the world was on his shoulders, only Jesus responded to that the way God wanted him to respond. He's the only one who could. And when that oil was pressed out of that olive, and that oil was burned as a light on Calvary, it lit to the whole world. This is what it looks like. This is how it looks like to handle suffering God's way. And for every sinner who comes to Jesus and recognizes, I'm a weak and a guilty sinner, and I cannot do it, but I want you to save me. Please save me. Jesus saves them, not because they tried to do better to come up to Jesus, but because they got low and recognized, I'm nothing without you, but you're the Savior. And every Christian who, since the day of your salvation, every time you face pressure, perhaps you've been handling it this way, I'll do better next time. I'll do better next time. I'll do better next time. When Jesus is just saying, put down your sword. And perhaps the truth is, you just need to learn how to trust me and talk to me and pray. Paul said, the fellowship of his sufferings And you need to learn how to pick up this cup and trust that even when you suffer and even when you die, even when those close to you die, you have a Savior who drank out of this cup before you. And I will be with you right through it. It's the press. What is it pressing out of you? You know what it pressed out of Jesus, so why would you not fall at his feet today and trust him and ask him for his help?